All right, I'd like to begin by having you all write down or keep in your head a lie you said or did today. And now, write down your lie. Was it something about yourself or another person that was the drive for it? Or was it about something about permanence or impermanence? Or was it something about dukkha, which includes dis-ease, dissatisfaction, discontent, which to me includes safety, could be in there, or not. So, was your lie the drive for the lie or the untruth based on some sense of holding on to a sense of permanence, which also could be a permanence of self. So these are interrelated. Some sense of self, which doesn't just mean yourself, but it can mean someone else's as a self or a group of selves, right? Them, they, we are selfing. Or was it the drive from some kind of dis-ease, discontent, dissatisfaction? Does that make sense? Or dukkha, again, dukkha. Which, okay. Could be just writing down one of those as your, and you could write more, but, and whatever your spontaneous thing, just work with that. All right, those are, you all know what those are, right? What are those? The 3 marks of existence, technically of conditioned existence, which we are all in. Conditioned existence. So they're considered the 3 aspects that is part of life, and we practice to see those. Now, I want to frame not lying around those today. Okay? So first, of course, around speech, for the most part, we talk about skillful speech, which comes from, of course, the Eightfold Path, which is the 4th of the 4 Noble Truths. And the Eightfold Path has 3 parts: the wisdom part, the ethical conduct or compassionate connection, I call it, part, and the meditative part, remember? So while there are 3 sections, there are 8. So the first one, the wisdom, or I like to call it the value part, it is skillful view or understanding, which in Buddhism is understanding the 4 Noble Truths, and karma, causes and conditions. Then the second part of that, of the wisdom aspect, is skillful thinking, or classically the wording is right. Right is inappropriate or complete, but I like what skillful. So skillful thinking, probably that's the old translation and still used. Probably a better word for it is motivation. Remember, because thinking is always purposive in Buddhism. And it also is there, I think, on purpose, because it's the next thing is the ethical conduct. So the way we think or we're motivated drives us into the interaction part, which is how we speak, how we act, and how we live, right? Skillful speech, skillful actions, skillful livelihood. And you notice speech, well, action includes essentially the precepts, which includes telling the truth, but speech has its own. And that's very purposeful because as we can really see in these days of social media, people just out their thoughts, right? And so your thoughts just slip out. And so we want to practice with that, right? What we think, we say. And now these days, it seems like that practice of being careful before you speak has been loosened a lot. We'll obviously talk more about that. And then, of course, the third part of the Eightfold Path is the meditative aspect, which includes skillful effort, skillful mindfulness, and skillful concentration. So those are the meditative qualities. These all should be a review for many, many of you. And what does the meditative part really consider, even though it's in the third? What does it consider? The bridge between your values and your action. So we meditate to reflect on, just like we did. Am I living, am my behavior in accordance with my values? Ethical conduct with wisdom, or does my wisdom work out with the conditions of life now and behaviors, right? Because then we can also change our ways of thinking and values depending on conditions, right? Does that make sense? So it's really very interconnected. Now the reason, okay, for that. So I will say, no, I'll leave that alone for now. Okay, so what I did was I really, I thought we'd go to the teachings, the Theravada teachings, to the, what's called the Pratimoksa. That's the Sanskrit. The Pali is the Pratimoksa, which is the rules for the monastics. So the rules for the monastic, so they are part of the suttas that are in the Theravada tradition. So it is an older sutta, and also then with the philosophy of the Theravada. By that I mean literally the philosophy, not necessarily all Theravadas are like this, but in general that philosophy is very much about self-practice, and that I practice to really overcome my unwholesomeness, my kleshas, all that, right? So this is by Dhanasari Bhikkhu. So for instance, he's like, some people ask, why do you have rules for the monastics when you are, practicing to be your best? Why do you need them? Isn't it just a self-practice? I understand karma, I understand the Four Noble Truths, so I'm just going to behave better, right? And then he's like, well, yeah, but we live in community, and anyone who lives in community knows, my word now, shit happens, right? And people don't always act in the best behavior. So the Buddha, right? And remember, the rules were made up as in terms of the precepts were made up as they go along. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But however, again, this is, and when I say from the sutta today, I mean from Dhanasari Bhikkhu, who is a scholar, right? Especially on the suttas. So he says, the Buddha, in laying down each rule, gave 10 reasons for doing so. 1, for the excellence of the community. Community is big C, which means Sangha, right? So we have rules to give, like a high bar for how a community should behave. 2, the peace of the community. 3, the curbing of the shameless. This is their kind of wording, right? The people who still lie, since we're talking about that precept, right? The comfort of the well-behaved bhikkhus, right? So those of us who are upright, it also gives us comfort. And the restraint of the pollutants related to the present life. So again, that's that Theravada. I have kleshas, I have unwholesomeness, I have to purify them. Okay? 6, that was 6. Oh no, 6, the prevention of pollutants related to the next life. So we don't talk a lot about it in the West, but karma is definitely part of Buddhism, because it's in karma in the sense of there's a lot of time for stuff to work out, right? That's one way of understanding karma. So how we are now conditions how our future is. That's one way, right? And you don't have to believe in past life, but you can believe that, you know, how you behave now will affect next week, because we'll all remember how you behave this week. So that's, you know, that's the future already, right? So in a sense, that could be a next your life in a week, in a sense, right? The arousing of faith in the faithless. So our behavior, for those who are skeptical about Buddhists, are like, they're behaving pretty nicely. Okay, there's something to them. The increase of the faithful, right? Those A to Z Buddhists are pretty cool. They don't lie. So hey, maybe I should be an A to Z Buddhist too. Right? The establishment of the true Dharma. Right? According to Thanissaro Bhikkhu, the Buddha's name for the religion he founded, I'm quoting here, was Dharma Vinaya. Vinaya means the rules of ethical conduct. So it means that you can't have the Dharma without the precepts, essentially, or a way of behaving. To the Buddha, those are related. And so the true Dharma is always dependent upon our behavior and our thinking behavior too, right? And then 10th, the fostering of discipline, as in skillful effort. Don't forget that while the Eightfold Path has 8 aspects, on a one level, it is talked about that there are actually 3 factors of the Eightfold Path that encompasses the whole thing. Skillful view of the Four Noble Truths and karma, skillful mindfulness, right? Having the clarity of awareness and the managing of how you are, and your awareness and how you behave, and skillful effort, right? Because skillful effort keeps you diligent at working at it, at engaging with it, at practicing with it. All right. And then he says, these reasons fall into 3 main types. The first 2 are external, to ensure peace and well-being within the community, big C again, so Sangha itself, and to foster and protect faith among the laity on whom the monks depend their support. So essentially, for the harmony of the community, as in the monastic community, and then of the wider community who supports the monastic. The third type of reason is internal, to help restraint and prevent mental pollutants, there we go, Theravada speak, within the individual monks. Why I say Theravada monk, it's just they're very focused on that, and of course, it's true. We have to be careful how we behave. Just the wording sometimes is a little bit, to me, negative, you could say, or a little bit judgmental. Okay. Within the individual monks, by monks here you mean nuns too, but really for us we mean practitioners, right? This last point quickly becomes apparent to anyone who seriously tries to keep to the rules, for they encourage mindfulness and circumspection in one's action, qualities that carry over into the training of the mind. So essentially, the rules are there to help us practice internally and externally. Now, when it's internal, however, it's very hard to enforce, right? It's hard for others to enforce. Certainly people try, but for the most part, you could, in a way we have to enforce ourselves around our precepts. There can be external rules, but until the community agrees on what those are, on a certain level, individuals are, accountable to themselves. And so where is it that the two kind of keep working together? And so there's always this thing about what is internal and what is external. And I think that's really important in terms of lying, because one, we have to be careful how we speak, and the community supports us to not necessarily just to quote unquote keep in line with the agreed upon rules, or communication, like we have communication practices, that's what we call our speech, right? I'll do another one on those. But so not only is it really about that, it's also more about, does the community, because things change in the community, does your behavior also shift, right, accordingly? And so a lot of our practice is, and Buddhism in particular, is very clear that while there is an emphasis on personal accountability, it's always, again, in context with community. For instance, let's see. I think I already brought up the Nazis last week or some other week, right, on speech. Well, for instance, even, I had one earlier. We're always trying to figure out ways of talking that is inclusive, right? One of my things, some of you have heard who took the Dharma, being anti-racist, is that, at a lot of white convert places, when they give talks, they say we, and then they give examples that just do not relate to other people. And there are assumptions that these are the experiences of everyone. And so I call it the royal white we myself. And it's that idea that I'm speaking for everyone, as opposed to, I'm not saying you can't say we, but you have to be careful where you say we and how you say we, and then contextually. And not only that, but at times when other people who don't speak like that, and therefore say I more and give I examples instead of making an assumption that everyone has the same experience that they do, then, then it gets flipped, and then it becomes, why do you always talk about yourself? So it's this very interesting way, depending on the power structure, right? Okay. Now, the thing that I think is really important here is that actually was rather surprising to me when I went to look specifically at the precepts of speech in skillful speech, which again come from the Eightfold Path. So right speech has, and some of you have heard this, I call them the what's and the how, which I'm not going to now, but in general, right speech is defined as, right speech defined wrong speech as lying, divisive speech, abusive speech, and idle chatter. Okay? I'll say the other three since we're going to talk about lying for the most part. Divisive speech is basically tale-bearing, as in T-A-L-E, not a kitty tail, tale-bearing among bhikkhus, or among practitioners, in hope of winning favor or causing a rift, right? So that's divisive speech, if you're trying to just split up. In other places, it's very specifically to break up friendship. That's divisive speech. Abusive speech, insults made with malicious intent to another practitioner, okay? And then idle chatter. This one really surprised me. Idle chatter, in terms of for monastics, is essentially, so one, it says you have to, so this is a very monastic rule, and I totally experienced this when I was with the nuns in Vietnam. As a monastic, you always have to tell another monastic where you're going. And actually at City Center or at Zen Center, we practice this in work meeting. Sometimes you get tired in work meeting and someone in the Sangha is like, I will be gone today. because I have a meeting at Green Gulch Farm, and you're like, oh, nice, good for you. But they're really practicing this practice in which you're always really upfront about what you're doing and your behavior, and how is it when you're not in the Sangha and community, and contributing to the Sangha, you explain why you're not present. So it's just really being accountable to each other. That's really what it is. So, you know, in our world of different contexts, we sometimes, you know, I sometimes get annoyed at that when really it is a practice. And in fact, I was just, you know, somebody just told us that they wouldn't be here tonight. And I was like, oh, that's a very good monastic practice. I don't know if they know they did it, but that's what they did, right? Now, but this thing says, in terms of what's idle chatter, it's related to that. If you're visiting lay families without having informed an available bhikkhu, so this is very much for the monks, but again, we'll just say practitioner, before or after a meal to which one has been invited. So if you overstay your welcome, or you're there for some other reason, right? Or you're entering a village, town, or city during the period after noon until the following dawn. Basically, you're up to no good, you know, because while there are these rules, there are lots of stories, and you can see pictures in like the Unsui book of Japanese monks like jumping over the fence to go drink or go have sex and stuff like that. So yeah, not just Japanese monk, that's just one book that had that. All right, without having taken leave of an available bhikkhu. So the other thing is to support that, you're supposed to never to travel by yourself. They really enforced it with the nuns. The monks were a little bit more, were given more leniency, unless there's an emergency. Okay. Now, the other thing that I found really interesting in general is that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers of punishment. Physical punishment is not one of them, according to the Buddha and the practice. So there are only one grouping, and the venial sin, right? No, mortal sin, I guess, for the Catholics, right? Mortal and venial, which one is the worst? Mortal, yeah. Anyway, it's called, and my Pali here sucks, parajika, which technically means defeat. But you will be expelled for life from the monastic if you do this. And there are only 4 things. Have sexual intercourse. They also say, we have children, so I won't say the rest, but so sexual intercourse, stealing, killing, and claiming to be superior, both in your practice, as in, oh, I've achieved a certain jhana state, you haven't, or that you can do certain things. So basically, it's very much about, you know, that one really surprised me, but it's very much about where you raise yourself up. For those who've taken the 8 precepts, say at Spirit Rock, when you do practice, you know, one of them is not to sleep on high beds, and it's a similar thing. You just don't put yourself above others. All right. Then there's one in which you're on probation, right? For 6 days. And this is very interesting. Not just 6 days, but, oh yeah, here it is. You're put on probation for 6 days, during which time you're stripped of your seniority. You're not trusted, this is his wording, to go anywhere unaccompanied by 4 other monks of regular standing. Unaccompanied, right? And every day for the 6 days, you have to confess your offense to every monk who lives in or happens to visit the monastery. And at the end of your probation, 20 monks have to convene to reinstate you to your original status. So it's very much about the community. Then the next one is you confess to a fellow monk. All right? And then you are stripped of that object, like if you've stolen it or something, or taken it. Sometimes forever, and sometimes you get it returned. I think like if you take food, I don't know the specifics, but all right. However, if you commit an offense and refuse to undergo the penalty, the community may decide how seriously they take the matter. I like this line. Since there's no monk's police beyond the individual conscience, it may often happen that no one else knows the offense to begin with, and nothing is done. If, however, it becomes common knowledge, the community regards it as a serious matter, they should talk privately with the monk to help him see the errors of his ways. If he is recalcitrant, they may strip him temporarily of his status. Oh, shoot. Can you hand me my thing? I guess it came off. Sorry, my battery's low. Until the offender sees the error of his ways. All right. Oh, yeah. And the Buddha saw no use for physical coercion in enforcing rules. If a monk had to be physically forced into abiding by the training, his heart wouldn't be in it. And so there's no way that he would benefit from it. Pretty nice, huh? Gosh, you wouldn't have any jails or prisons in the in the Buddhist sense, anyway. All right. Now, the reason I bring that up, and I think is so interesting, because in lying, here are the 4 offenses, according to the monks. Making an unfounded charge to another monk. Making an unfounded charge about another person, I'll just say person, that he has committed the first offense, the mortal sin, in hopes of having him disrobed. That's, you yourself will be expelled. So if you're trying to put the blame on someone else to try to kick them out of the community, if it's found out that's what you did, then you get kicked out of the community. That's pretty big, right? So it's really important. Notice the importance is on the self as in the Sangha, the community of self. 2, distorting the evidence while accusing a practitioner of having committed the kind in which you get expelled. So not only that you try to get rid of someone, but you distort the evidence. You say, well, this is the evidence, but you lied, basically, about the evidence. Then, for both of those, you would be, or for this one, you would be on probation. The 6 days thing for your stripper, your seniority, all that. The intentional, third thing, if you intentionally misrepresent the truth to another individual, right, is one in which you have to confess. The punishment is you have to confess. If you make an unfounded charge to another practitioner or get someone else to make a charge towards him, her, or they, then you are also on probation. Oh, no, sorry. Unfounded charge that will get someone probation, you have to confess, or you got someone else to do it. Now, here's the thing, is that you notice that either the community holds you accountable, or you have to confess. Those are basically the punishment. Either community holds you accountable, or you have to confess. And this is why in monastic practice, depend on the community, but either every week, every 2 weeks, or every month, you confess. There's a meeting of the community, and confession is part of it. I mean, we chant the confession in the morning, the repentance in the morning, but as a community, you do come together to confess. Now, we have never done it. It's called the full moon ceremony in our tradition. these days people just get together and talk, but in a real practice, they do confess. And some of you have heard the confession about the laughing cow cheese in Vietnam. I'm not going to go into it again, but it's very, the purpose of it, while it sounds very harsh in some ways, or it is, again, to live in a way that you are responsible to the community. And it's a way to practice being transparent about yourself. Remember that one of my senior Dharma sister, by that in the lineage with Blanche, Janadaka, when she was a Shuso, she said, we ordained to live a transparent life. And I was blown away. I was like, shit, right? Like, what? What? But this is part of it, that we are accountable to each other. So the sense of self here is a communal sense of self. There's an individual self and there's a communal sense of self, right? And the sense of impermanence here, okay, now it's time for, not quite confessional, but who would like to talk about their their lie or untruthfulness they did, and what was it driven by? It's a quasi-confessional right now. I could stop the recording. I think so much of our practice is about not denying our past and the ways that we've learned to cope, right? That may really bring along with it behaviors that isn't always upright. And so I think it's important to keep asking ourselves, is my perception true to the moment? That's one. And two is that we need to find communities that we can be honest in and we can trust. You know, by that I don't mean trust is I'm going to read a thing about trust here, but trust is not like a you know, like a ticket. I give it to you and I just trust you. Trust is a interaction thing, and it changes, right? And however, we need to have some community accountability and also a community to reflect and that we can go to be able to ask, is this honest? Is this clear? What do you think about this? Right? I think that's really important. Or at least one other person, or, you know, this is partly why in the Soto Zen tradition, having teachers, a teacher in particular, and then having friends. By the way, which did take me to, in terms of the penalties, Thanissaro Bhikkhu said that the reason, there are two factors how the penalties were made up by the Buddha. And one is that it's a heart and mind training. So that's the self thing, right? I practice to make sure that my intention and perception work well together. Okay, I'll say, maybe I'll make this a 2-class thing. And then the second principle used in determining penalty is based on the Buddha's observation to Ananda, his attendant, cousin and attendant, one of his chief disciples, that friendship and companionship with the good is the whole of the religious life. So remember, your Kalyana Mitra practice is, you know, the story goes that Buddha said, or Ananda said, oh, Buddha, isn't half of the holy life your spiritual friends? And the Buddha said, no, the whole of your practice life is your spiritual friends. Like, they support you. You can't practice without your friends, essentially. That's why you guys come to this. Otherwise, we would not be practicing. I mean, we wouldn't have a Sangha. I'd just be speaking. All right, I'm going to end with Adrienne Rich, who's a lesbian poet, or was, from On Lies, Secrets, and Silence, which I read in the 80s. It came out in 1977, which blew my mind. And here's part of it. She says, truthfulness, honor, is not something which springs a blaze of itself. It has to be created between people. The possibilities that exist between two people or among a group of people are a kind of alchemy. They are the most interesting thing in life. The liar is someone who keeps losing sight of these possibilities. When relationships are determined by manipulation, by the need or control, they may possess a dreary, bickering kind of drama, but they cease to be interesting. They are repetitious. The shock of human possibility has ceased to reverberate through them. When someone tells me a piece of the truth which has been withheld from me, and which I needed in order to see my life more clearly, it may bring acute pain, but it can also flood me with a cold, C-sharp wash of relief. Often such truths come by accident or from strangers. It isn't that to have an honorable relationship with you, I have to understand everything or tell you everything at once, or that I can know beforehand everything I need to tell you. It means that most of the time I am eager, longing for the possibility of telling you. That these possibilities may seem frightening, but not destructive to me. So dis-ease is part of being honest, or can be. That was my line. Back to her. That I feel strong enough to hear your tentative and groping words. That we both know we are trying all the time to extend the possibilities of truth between us. The possibility of life between us. I think a great way to talk about how can we practice truthfulness with ourselves and with each other. Thank you for your attention and practice. All right, let's dedicate the merit. You're welcome to unmute and echo. For any merit we accrued tonight.
For any merit
we accrued tonight.
We dedicate to our practice.
We dedicate
to our practice
of truthfulness.
Of truthfulness.
truthfulness.
In a sea of circumstances.
In the sea of
circumstances.
May we practice skillfully.
May we practice
skillfully.
Wisely.
Wisely.
And for the benefit of all beings.
And for
the benefit of all beings.
And the 10 directions and the 3 times.
And the 10 directions and the 3 times.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
See you next week.